Hello everyone. I'm making this video specifically for Voices of America. They basically had a couple of questions that they had for me, and they wanted a video interview. So, hello Voices of America, and the questions that I was asked was specific to a ceremony at one of the local churches. It was a blessing of the rifle ceremony, and specifically a blessing of the AR-15s, and that was done by the Iron Cross Ministry. Okay, now I'm not a member of that ministry. I've actually never been there. I had heard about this blessing. Um, Now, before we get into that, let me tell you guys a little bit about my background. My name is Bill Zappa. I am a certified firearms instructor. I travel all over the Northeast, training people. And in addition to being a firearms instructor, I'm also an accountant. So I have some, I did many years in public accounting. At one point, I was a chief financial officer for an import-export company. Um, so I have some background in business. So that's the business side of things. Now, I actually grew up in New York City. I grew up in Brooklyn, and I basically, I now live in a very rural part of Northeast Pennsylvania. So I have both a city I have city experience in my background, and I also have country living experience in my background. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to put out there. So basically, you guys get some idea of where this information is coming from. Now, in addition to being a firearms instructor, I'm also basically I've also done a great deal of historical study. Um, I've particularly in European history and American history. Okay, so that's something else that I'm kind of bringing to the table. And in addition to that, I'm also a competitive sword fighter. Okay, I actually put on a full suit of armor, and I do tournaments and competitions where I'm fighting people, with swords and other medieval weapons. So I also bring that to the table. So that's my background. I think all that's is going to kind of come together to help the people over at the Voices of America understand, some of the questions that they have with regards to gun rights in America. So the question that was brought up is the blessing of the guns ceremony. Is it proper? Is it normal? Is it a strange thing? Or and the answer to that is that if you study European history, you will find that that is actually very normal. Okay, in European Christianity, for example, they had the blessing of the fields, all right, so that the crops would grow. They had blessings of the livestock, okay, and they also had the blessings of the guns, particularly before a battle. And this is the typical type of a gun that was used in World War One and in World War Two, and in the part of Europe where where my family was and where my grandfather participated in World War Two. He in fact basically a priest came to the troops, and he blessed their rifles before they went into battle, and that was actually something that was done on a regular basis before they went into a big engagement. Okay, now what's also interesting to note is if you look at the medieval sword, right, it's no coincidence that as you hold the sword up, it takes the form of a cross. Okay, right? That's no coincidence. Now, the cross guard did serve a useful purpose in that it did offer some protection to the hand. Although having a curve on the guard was a lot more useful because basically, as you rock the sword back to take your swing, the guard will interfere less with your wrist. But in many cases, knights prefer to have a straight guard like this because what they would actually do is they would actually stick this in the ground, and this would form, this would take the form of a cross, and they would basically pray to the cross. Okay, so this is not something that's unusual. Blessing of the guns, blessing of the swords, is something that has a very long history in Europe. Okay, now since we're talking about history, let's talk about swords and we'll kind of come up the historical line. Okay, um, in most parts of Europe, it was actually legal for peasants to own swords, and the nobility. And when we say nobility, what we mean is the fighting class or the ruling class. Okay, um, the nobility consisted of about maybe 2% of the population. Okay, and then you had your clergy, which consisted maybe of another 2% of the population, and basically the clergy. They were basically the accountants and the lawyers of medieval times. They were the ones that because they were literate and they could keep records, they were the ones that they were the bookkeepers basically. So that was an important role of the clergy, and that's one of the reasons why the nobility kept the clergy around, right? And then the other 95, 96% of the population was the peasants, okay? And basically the peasants. In Europe, what they were mostly they were serfs, which means that they were tied to the land, and what that was is it was a form of slavery because they were tied to the land, and the land baron, the person that controlled the land, had complete control over them. Basically, he was able to make up whatever laws that he wanted, pretty much at whim, and basically, the people that lived on the land, they were subservient to the land baron entirely. Okay, and basically, if you did not, if you didn't work hard enough, basically the land baron could execute you. Okay, because he had complete control over your life, and the way that worked is basically he would just give you enough food to live on, and basically you worked for him. So basically, this was in fact a form of slavery that existed in Europe for many centuries. Okay, so the land barons, okay, they did not want to have any peasant uprisings because the peasants were about 96% of the population. So in order to control them, they prohibited them from owning weapons. And training with those weapons, and that's part of the heritage that basically came down. And as as people migrated from Europe to the Americas, they brought that historical knowledge with them. That basically the people that ruled over them and controlled them did not want them to have weapons. And the people as they came here to America, they definitely wanted to have weapons. In fact, they wanted to have the best weapons available to them. Now, and this is very significant because basically there's a reason why democracy happened when it happened in America, because there were prior attempts at democracies and republics in Europe, and that what we saw is that they all failed. You had the democracy of Athens that failed, and then you had a couple of republics in Italy that also failed. And the reason was that in the age of swords, okay, it takes a lot of training to get good with this. Okay, on average, because like I said earlier, I'm a competitive sword fighter. Okay, it takes a minimum of 6 months of training for somebody to stand in front of me and be semi-competent. Okay, on the other hand, with the musket, okay, I can teach somebody how to use this musket, this flintlock musket, in a couple of hours. Okay, and basically within a couple of hours of training, that person would be good enough with this musket that I would not dare stand in front of them and have a duel with them. Okay, because they would be just as capable of killing me as I would of them. So I don't like those odds. With the sword, on the other hand, it doesn't matter. If you get a couple of months of training with this, I have over 12 years of training with this. You have no chance of beating me unless you have the type of experience that I have. Okay, and all that changes with the musket. Now, at the time of the American revolutions, the civilians in the colonies, they actually had an advantage because at the time rifled muskets were available to the colonists. Which the British Army, did not use. Okay, and the rifling basically spun the bullet, gave it more stability, and gave the rifles that the colonists were using greater reach. Okay, and George Washington actually made good use of that, and basically, he had specialists. He basically came up with the marksmen and with the snipers. He used that to his advantage, specifically to target British officers. Okay, and the reason why he was able to do that is because the colonists had, as civilians, they had access to better rifles than the British had. Okay, so that's important for you guys to remember. It's also important for you guys to know that right up until the Civil War, okay, civilians had access to repeating firearms. But when we say repeating, like we're talking about guns like a lever action that could be quickly reloaded and fired. Okay, civilians had access to repeating firearms when this was not available to the regular army. Okay, so for at least 100 years, civilians, in the first 100 years of American history, civilians had access to better firearms than the government troops had access to it, and that's important when we try and look back and try to figure out, what were the intentions of the founding fathers when they wrote the Second Amendment. We have to take all this into consideration. We have to take into consideration how is it that civilians had access to better weapons, and the reason for that is pretty. If you look in the Federalist Papers, will become apparent. At the time that the Second Amendment was written, it was never a question if the people would be able to own firearms. The question was if the federal government would be allowed to own firearms. Okay, so that was the only question at the time. So that's what came forward. Now, when we look at the Second Amendment, if we want to understand what it means, what its intentions are, well, let's look at the entire Bill of Rights, okay? Because let's look at the context. So when we look at the context of the Bill of Rights, right, when we're talking about freedom of speech, okay, whose freedom of speech? Is it the state's freedom of speech? No, it's the individual's freedom of speech, okay? When we talk about, freedom of religion, whose freedom of religion? The individuals. They can't search your house without a warrant or arrest you without a warrant. Who are they talking about? They're talking about, that's a protection for the individual. When they say they can't quarter troops in your house, who are they talking about? They're talking about the individual. So everything in the, if you look at the Bill of Rights, everything from Bill of Rights number 1, or rather Amendment number 1, all the way through Amendment number 9, okay, it's all about individual rights. Okay, so if you look at the Second Amendment, it falls into that category. So it doesn't make sense that the Second Amendment would be some type of collective right when the amendment before that and after that are both individual rights. Okay, the only one that's a little bit different is Amendment number 10, and what that basically says that any powers that the states do not explicitly give up to the federal government, they retain it for themselves. Okay, so again, it's all about limiting the power of the federal government. So now let's take a closer look at the Second Amendment. Let's look at some of the key words in there. When they talk about the right to bear arms. Okay, first of all, it's a right. It's not a privilege. It's a right. It's a right. So, arms. What do they mean by arms when they say arms? Well, arms is short for armaments. Okay, basically, it's military equipment. The founding fathers wanted to use the most broad term possible. They didn't say right to bear guns. They didn't say right to bear muskets. Okay, they specifically said armaments because they want to also include the guns, the ammunition, the accessories, also the boots, the horse feed, anything that the ordinary soldier carries into battle is what we call armaments. Okay. Now, some people might say, well, what about tanks and battleships and nuclear bombs? Okay. Well, those are what we call crew-operated equipment. Okay. That's a little bit different than what the individual soldier carries. Okay. So let's not confuse with let's not allow other people to confuse us with that. Okay. So we have this right to bear arms. Now there's a word that says bear. What does bear mean? Now bear means carry. Okay, it's a very old word in the English language, and it originally referred to a woman carrying a child. So you not only have a right to own guns, you have a right to carry them, for your personal protection. Okay, so that's what the word bear means. Now, how about the militia? What do you mean when we talk about the militia? And for that, basically, what we can do is we can look to George Mason, one of the co-authors of the Second Amendment. Okay, basically that's the guy that wrote it. And what he said is that the militia was all the people except for a few politicians. Okay, so all the people, all of us who are not politicians, are a militia. Okay. Now, how about that other word, well-regulated? What does well-regulated mean? Well, if we look at the dictionary of the time, right, and we see how the phrases were used. For example, at the time, it was common to say a well-regulated clock. Okay, it meant that your clock or your watch was working properly. Okay, it was common at the time to say you have a very well-regulated mind. Okay, it meant that you were thinking straight. Okay, they didn't say thinking straight back then. They said you had a well-regulated mind. So if something is well-regulated, it means that it is in good working order. Okay, so that's what the word well-regulated meant. It meant in good working order. It did not mean government control. The concept of government control did not exist at the time. Okay, so it couldn't possibly mean government control. Okay, and then let's also look at the word shall not be infringed. Okay, that is pretty self-explanatory. So shall not be infringed means no government restrictions. Okay, so that's your Second Amendment for you. Those are what the individual words within the Second Amendment mean. And we can also look at the context of the Bill of Rights around it. Okay, let's look. Did we have any other questions? We talked about the blessing of the guns, and we already said that historically it is very normal for swords and guns to be blessed. Okay, this is a typical gun that was used in World War II and also World War One. And my grandfather had a gun similar to this, and basically basically a priest came to the camp and blessed all their guns before they went into battle. Now, at the time that at the time of the swords, basically this was the best weapon at the time. Okay, at the time of the American Revolution, this was the best weapon at the time. Okay. Around World War One, World War Two, or specifically World War One, this was the best weapon at the time. Okay. Now a lot of people will look at this and they say hunting rifle. Okay. No, this is not a hunting rifle. Even though it is a bolt-action rifle, bolt-action rifles were not designed for hunting. They were designed for combat. Okay. In fact, this gun, okay, is twice as powerful as this gun. This gun produces close to 3,000 foot-pounds. This gun only produces about 1,200 foot-pounds. Okay, so this gun is basically twice as powerful as this gun, and you can see if you look at the ammunition, the cartridge is basically almost twice as long as the ammunition that goes into this gun, and it also has a much greater range. Okay, so what's happened since since World War II? Well, basically what they've done is they've made guns cheaper and lighter. Okay, the benefit of this gun is it is very light. It weighs about 6.5 pounds unloaded. Okay, and it is very modular. It's very easy to take it apart, put it back together. It's easy to make repairs. Because this is such a light gun, this is very easy for women to shoot. So it's a very popular gun among women. The recoil on this is very light. The gun does not kick much. Most women, if I give them this gun, first of all, the gun is too heavy for them to hold up. They end up dropping the muzzle, and when they do fire the gun, the recoil is so hard that it gives them a nice bruise on the shoulder. Whereas with this gun over here, they will shoot hundreds of rounds on this thing, and it will, and it is very pleasant to shoot. And that's the reason why the military likes it. The military does not use this gun because it is an all-powerful gun. Okay, otherwise, if they wanted a powerful gun, they'd be using this thing. Okay, the reason why the military uses this is because it is a light gun that is also very light recoiling, and because the gun is so light recoiling, you can practice a lot more with it. Okay. So basically, by practicing more, you get better. So basically, by having a gun that is more pleasant to shoot, you will shoot more. Okay. So the other thing that we want to talk about that I was asked is let's talk about city versus country culture. And like I said, I grew up in New York City. I didn't like it very much there. I moved out into the country about as quickly as I could. Guns mean different things to city people versus country people. When city people think of guns, usually the only information that they have is what they see on television or what they see on the news. Okay, and in all cases with city people, guns are associated with killing people. Okay, whereas with country people, okay, we basically live out here in the woods. We target practice all day. I mean, basically when we look at a gun like this, we recognize that there's actually a very low chance, probably a 0.00001% chance that this gun would actually ever be used to harm anybody. Okay, the normal use of this gun is recreational. We do target practice with this. It does also serve the purpose of home defense. Okay, but that's kind of like, okay, well, you drive a car. Okay, you drive a car to to do your business. And if you are ever injured, then it would also be useful, let's say, to get you to the hospital. Okay, but you don't learn to drive because you might one day need your car to get yourself to the hospital. Well, the same thing goes with guns like this. We shoot these guns because they're fun to shoot. It's a fun family activity. It's a good skill to have, and if at by chance one day it also serves the purpose of defending ourselves or defending our freedom, that is a very good byproduct of having this gun and being skilled with it. Okay. And let's see, the other question that I was asked, are humans born sinless? And I'm guessing that this somehow relates to this ministry, the Church of the Iron Cross. In my particular religion, we believe that all people are born with sins. But that's my religion, and I don't think that I should be imposing what my religion believes on other people. So if this other religion believes something different on this particular issue, that's fine with me. I don't think it's important. I don't think it certainly doesn't matter as far as gun rights go. So if that's what they believe, more power to them. I really don't have anything else to say on that. But those are my thoughts. I think I answered all of the questions that Voice of America had. And if you guys have any more questions, by all means, drop me some comments. Thank you very much for inquiring and asking for my opinion. Talk to you guys soon. Bye bye.